With the handing over of the Form 700, the MiG-21 has retired from the Indian Air Force's service. The Indian Air Force itself is 93 years old, and at 62 years, it means that the MiG-21 served the Air Force for nearly two-thirds of the Air Force's existence. The fighter was codenamed Fishbait by NATO and Badal by the Indian Air Force. The MiG-21 and the F-104 were designed in the early 1950s to take on one serious, strong threat. That is the specter of nuclear-armed bombers attacking the Russians, and for the American side, Russian bombers armed with nuclear bombs attacking America. Thankfully, this situation never materialized. In the early 1960s, the Pakistanis acquired the F-104 Starfighter. India needed a quick response to that procurement and enter the MiG-21. An airplane designed from the ground up to take on nuclear-armed bombers flying at high altitudes to annihilate a city-sized target of its choice. In 1962, India signed the deal, and in 1963, the fighters reached India. They came to Bombay via ship, and from there, they were flown to Chandigarh, to this very base from which the MiG-21 bids adieu to, well, guard the country for the next 6 decades. The first squadron which was raised was the number 28 squadron, the first supersonics, very aptly named. After this induction, just before the 1965 war, the airplane was fully operational in the Indian Air Force, but it could not see too much action in that war. But the Indian Air Force knew that it had a winner at hand. And by 1971, the Indian Air Force had 5 operational squadrons which took the fight to the enemy, both in the air and on the ground. In 1971 war, the MiG-21 shot down Pakistani F-104 starfighters, its arch nemesis, the F-86 Sabres, and the Chinese iteration of the MiG-19. But that was expected from the MiG-21. What was not expected from the MiG-21 was its ground attack capabilities. The MiG-21s of number 28 and number 4 squadrons, which were then located in Guwahati, bombed Kurmitola and Tejgaon airfields in Dhaka, rendering them useless by the 6th of December. That means from the 6th to the 16th, the Pakistani Air Force was not a part of the equation in that war in eastern Bangladesh.
See, this bombing mission was done on 6th of December. There were 4 aircraft involved. I was flying with 4 squadron in Guwahati, and the other squadron was 28. So two pilots from 28, the CO and another squadron leader, and number 3 and 4 were me and flight group captain Hemant Sardesai. So the 4 of us got airborne. We had to climb to cross the Meghalaya hills. After that, as we approached the Pakistan border, we went low as possible, and about 2-3 minutes before, we eased up to 5 kilometers of height and positioned ourselves. Now that is the time we were extremely vulnerable because we had nothing to defend ourselves. If somebody had come and got a shot at us, we were like sitting ducks. Nobody came, lucky. So we just positioned ourselves along the runway, did a 35 to 40 degrees dive angle, steep dive angle, release our bombs more than 1.5 kilometers altitude, and pulled out so that we do not come below 1 kilometer of height, where the Chinese Shilka guns were very effective up to that. So we did one trip, both the bombs gone, all 4 aircraft. We just pulled out, turned left, and headed home. Then we saw, I think one of us took a photograph, and we could see craters on the runway, and that was the end of Pakistan Air Force activity.
More interestingly, the Indian Air Force's MiG-21s destroyed, rocketed the governor's house in Dhaka, which basically brought an end to the civil government in East Pakistan, with only the military left to fend for itself in an increasingly hostile country. After the 1971 war, there was no looking back for the MiG-21 in Indian service. The Indian Air Force, from 5 squadrons in 1971, went up to 23 squadrons of the MiG-21. 23 of 41 squadrons of the Indian Air Force have at one point of time or another flown the MiG-21. The Indian Air Force has acquired over 870 airframes, out of which 660 were built right here in India by HAL. It is estimated that over 3,000 fighter pilots of the Indian Air Force have flown and trained on this fighter to take the fight to the enemy. Modernization had kept pace, but for how long can you keep flying an old aircraft designed for a different type of fighting? 6 variants of this fighter, apart from the trainer, were operated by the Indian Air Force. The latest of which is the MiG-21 Bison, and also the last of this glorious line of fighters. Of these over 800 fighters, 240 were the Type 77 or the FL variant, which was followed by the BIS, which came in just 4 short of equaling that record. The aircraft has performed many roles, such as taking down enemy fighters, destroying airfields, electronic warfare, and one could argue that it could do everything. But the one thing that it was not suited for was for training young pilots.
Could you tell us about, well, let's start with you. How is it learning to fly the aircraft, and how could you tell us about your
So the
first
biggest
landing?
challenge, yeah, the biggest, what happened is that we finished our advanced jet training on the Kiran aircraft at the Air Force Academy. And then a few of us were earmarked to go directly onto MiG-21s. But before going on to MiG-21s, we were given an introduction and a familiarization with Russian instrumentation by flying the Polish Iskra fighter in Hakimpet. So we used to do about 6 dual sorties on the Iskra, and then we found ourselves in Tezpur. So for us, for all of us, in fact, it was quite a remarkable transition to be asked to take off at 320 kilometers per hour and land at 340 to 360 kilometers per hour, right? With rates of descent of 8 to 10 meters per second, which is much more than double of what we were used to on the Kiran and other aircraft. So it's a question of it's a question of just hanging in there and being able to produce what you had to do in those initial few sorties and keep your head above the water. I mean to say, you hoped like hell that you did not balloon after round off, after flare out. You hoped like hell that you didn't wash off your speed very rapidly, because once you washed off your speed on the MiG-21 very rapidly, then you entered into a region that is called a region of reverse command, wherein even if you were to open throttle, it would not lead to an increase in thrust or speed. So you always had to stay on the margins, wherein you don't enter the region of reverse command, and you manipulated your throttle and your angle of attack in such a way that you landed safely. Now, once you got over the hump, after the initial few sorties, you slowly got your hang into it, and then it pretty much became like acquiring another skill or mastering another aircraft. But you never, when you did your MOF training, you never really mastered the aircraft, because the aircraft was required a lot of skill in order to master.
So I've heard that after you,
Yeah,
please.
no, go ahead.
So I've heard that during the finals you can't really see the runway.
Yeah. So what happens is that most Western aircraft have a relatively comfortable angle of attack on approach while landing. So you have, and the cockpit design is such that you have a pretty much good view of the runway and the surrounding area, even just short of landing, even till short of landing. Whereas in the MiG-21, it's only on top of your approach that you had a clear view of the runway, and as you came down, the angle of attack kept increasing, and your forward and peripheral vision kept reducing as the angle of attack increased. So yes, so we were told that, don't worry too much about forward visibility. Look through the side windows to check whether you're properly aligned with the runway, and ensure that your angle of attack doesn't go beyond the permissible limits, and ensure that your speeds are in control, and pretty much everything should be okay.
So overall, operationally, the aircraft proved its mettle. As a platform and as a combat aircraft, the kind of roles it did, I think again, it's a strong legacy it leaves behind. All kind of roles. We talked about air combat, we talked about air to ground. It did a photo recce role. It did a electronic warfare role.
35 squad.
35 squad. It was modified even for escort jamming. So across the board, all roles. And don't forget the role in training.
Right.
After Hunters, when the Hawks got delayed, apart from Hunters, the MiG-21 started getting utilized. And when Hunters phased out, only MiG-21s were utilized for advanced jet training and putting all the pilots into the operation squadrons thereafter. So huge role there. Again, huge contribution.
By the mid-1990s, the aircraft had started showing its age. Although it did participate in the Kargil war, and just a month later, it shot down a Pakistani Navy Atlantique that was on a snooping mission in the northern Gujarat region. Just 20 years later, the MiG-21 made the headlines again, this time for shooting down a Pakistani F-16. Now, the F-16 was designed keeping the MiG-21 in mind. The lessons of the Vietnam War were fresh in the minds of the Americans when they designed the F-16, and the chief tormentor of the Americans during the Vietnam War was this machine behind us, the MiG-21. Although relatively modern from the inside, but its short range, inability to refuel in the air, just 5 weapon stations, and a host of smaller other problems, along with an aging airframe, has shut the proverbial door for the MiG-21 in Indian Air Force's service. With the retirement of the MiG-21, now we see that the Sukhoi 30 MKI is the backbone of the Indian fighter fleet. Then later, the Tejas Mark 1A will perform the roles of the MiG-21. After 62 years of service, this airplane is retiring from the Air Force, just like an individual would around the age of 60. This squadron, the 23 Squadron, to which these airplanes belong, is now the last of the first supersonics.